Audiobook: How to Turn Fear into Fuel for Success. Introduction. The different dimensions of being human are profoundly fascinating. A leap into the void, in essence, will always be a leap into the void. The difference lies in knowing it or not, in understanding or not knowing how it will be carried out. There are, ultimately, two types of leaps, the reckless one and the confident one. Both generate the same fear, but their consequences could not be more different. The foolish leap occurs when someone leaves a place without a what or why in their life. There is no direction, no purpose. Some people say, "I want to leave here. I don't want this or that." But when asked what they do yearn for, they respond uncertainly, "I don't know yet. I'll figure it out." From a certain perspective, this is dangerous because the energies needed to move forward require a defined emotional tone. It's not enough to know what you don't want. It's crucial to know what you do want and, above all, why you want it. What the heart yearns to feel, sooner or later, the mind reveals. Leaping without a clear purpose is not courage, but foolishness. On the other hand, when you don't have a how but you do have a what and a why, even though the fear persists and the feeling of emptiness is the same, things happen that defy all logic, surpassing what one's imagination could anticipate. There was a case in which someone wrote a book because their partner got them to promise to do it, despite having no idea how to do it. At first, the manuscript was incomprehensible, even to the editor, who told them, "When you give a lecture, you're perfectly understandable, but this is indecipherable." However, after diligent polishing, that first book became a source of pride. At first, the idea of writing a book seemed impossible. Many, when asked, would admit it was inconceivable. But a promise, a clear what, and a firm why achieved what seemed unattainable, finding the how. Thus, when purpose and reason are present, the path, though uncertain, eventually reveals itself. Chapter 1. It's also the fruit of a promise. A promise he made to his wife and children when they were young. Whenever he came home, he liked to make up stories to entertain the children, and for some reason, they loved those stories. One day, they came with a tape recorder. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, and they, with a smile, said they wanted to record him. He felt embarrassed. "Please, this isn't interesting," he said, but they insisted. They wanted him to write a story, a fable. Years passed, until, suddenly, he felt the calling. A deep desire to write that fable he'd been asked to write so often. He was excited. He had an immense desire to create something fictional that would help people discover the greatness within them. He told the publisher this, and they embraced the idea with enthusiasm. The Greek world had always fascinated him, not only because of the philosophy, but because he felt that era had been extraordinary for Western civilization. He wanted his story to have at least a classical component. He had been fortunate enough to read a book by a professor of medical history that talked about how Greek physicians, 2,500 years ago, discovered the healing power of words. That idea struck a chord with him, so he decided to take the plunge and dare to write fiction. Although, in reality, he read very little. His reading was mostly essays, neuroscience books, and research. He didn't have a broad literary background, but the publisher believed this was his natural fit. However, when he tried to start, nothing came out. Nothing at all. He knew he wanted to include characters of different ages, facing different problems. He loved mythology, had studied it passionately, but the ideas just wouldn't come. 6 months went by with no results. He kept studying, kept researching, but the story was nowhere to be found. He felt ashamed. The publisher trusted him, and he had nothing to offer them. Until one day, without warning, something surprising happened. He was reading, as he often did in the mornings, at night, on the bus, anywhere. He lived surrounded by books. And suddenly, it was as if a floodgate opened inside him. A new, completely unknown force propelled him to his desktop computer. He began to write. The characters began to emerge on their own. First, a 16-year-old boy appeared, struggling at school. He felt excluded and couldn't keep up with his classes, especially history, where his teacher seemed to dislike him markedly. Then his mother appeared, a widow who worked in a hostile workplace, where aggressive behavior was prevalent. She suffered from health problems, especially digestive problems. Then the young man's grandfather appeared, a 75-year-old retired cardiologist, whose life seemed to have lost its meaning. And later, another female figure, a mature woman facing news that shook us all. Fear, uncertainty, human fragility. Everything emerged with astonishing naturalness. I didn't know where all that came from. He wasn't someone who smoked or took strange substances. He drank wine occasionally, in moderation. Nothing more. And yet, there were those characters, those chapters that seemed dictated by something deeper than himself. With 2 chapters completed, she decided to send them to the publisher. She thought they were either very good or something very strange was going on. She gave them to the fiction editor and the general editor. Both were deeply moved. They asked her to continue along that path. Although, of course, they realized that if it had taken her 6 months to write 2 chapters, the novel would be ready, perhaps never. But it wasn't like that. The story began to flow endlessly. The characters, their lives lost in confusion, frustration, and fear, began to transform. The Greek gods appeared before him, a story 2,500 years old. When his youngest son asked him if he had really invented them, he replied that the gods are what they are, that mythology has its rules. The publisher, without his knowledge, asked a doctor of ancient history to review the manuscript. She corrected only one detail, one of the monster's heads. She explained that there was an older, more reliable version. He agreed to the change. In just 2 months, the story was complete. When he handed it in, they couldn't believe it. He told them how the process had been. He spoke to them about that inner force that, when unleashed, leaves a human being in awe. Because everyone, without exception, has a spark of magic within them. He had no experience writing novels, or even in that kind of narrative. And yet, he did it with such profound ease that even today, rereading it moves him. It's that part of him he wants to awaken in others. It's not an idea he wants to convey, but an experience. And one of the most intense experiences was, precisely, writing that novel. His life changed profoundly afterward. 2 days later, he was scheduled to teach a course in a serenely beautiful mountainous region. And the person who taught that course was no longer the same person he had been before. He was transformed. Since then, his life has not stopped changing. Something profound moved within him, something for which he is immensely grateful. The central motto of his work is clear: the impossible can be made possible. He says this with the thought of those, like him, who face seemingly insurmountable walls. Walls of health, vitality, relationships, unfulfilled dreams. He would like everyone to dare to imagine that these walls can become borders. The book doesn't aim to offer simple answers, but rather to accompany the reader in that process. Crossing a border isn't easy, but breaking down a wall, especially one built by the mind, is one of the greatest challenges. And what he learned is that all magic lies beyond one's comfort zone. His 6 previous books, all essays, demanded the utmost from him in terms of research, effort, and dedication. But they were already his refuge, his familiar territory. Leaving that zone is like venturing into the unknown. The destination isn't yet visible. Only the uncertainty of the journey can be felt. The familiar is behind us, but the new has yet to arrive. We're clear about what we've lost, but not about what we'll gain. The deepest comfort zone is perhaps the one in which one has defined oneself. That rigid identity that dictates who you are, what you can or can't do. Those limiting beliefs that whisper that some things are too big for you, or that you are too small for them. And yet, when you cross those thresholds, that's when the truly extraordinary begins. In my personal experience, I've discovered that often what we believe to be impossible can become possible. This doesn't mean we should act irrationally, but rather that there are things that seem unattainable to us, yet they happen. As you once said, and wanted to, what at first seems improbable later reveals itself to be a true possibility. This book represents a journey, but not just a physical one. There is an external journey that takes place in Greece. Yes, but the true journey, the most meaningful one, is the one that occurs inward, within oneself. The geographical displacement is merely the wrapping. The real gift is the inner transformation. And that is where my true passion lies, inner journeys. In these inward journeys, two great truths are discovered. The first is that, from a very young age, we have told ourselves a story about ourselves. The problem is that, over time, we have come to believe it as if it were an absolute truth. I remember being a medical student, taking clinical psychology, when I was barely 19 years old. One day, the professor, a somewhat distant woman, mentioned that by the age of 7, a person's personality is already fully formed. I was astonished. I thought I must have misunderstood, so I waited until the end of the class and went over to clarify. "Professor, can I talk to you for a moment?" She hurriedly replied, "What do you want?" "I thought I heard you say that by the age of 7, your personality is already completely determined. Is that right?" "That's exactly what I said," he confirmed seriously. "But I'm 19 years old, and I want to change many things in my life." "It's late," he replied without hesitation. Imagine for a moment if I had accepted that idea as true. What would have become of my life? What you believe, you create, because you live it as an immovable certainty. We all carry within us those stories we call narratives, generated in the prefrontal lobes of the brain. We experience them as indisputable truths, but many of them are limiting. They lead us to think, "This is who I am, I can't change," or "This isn't for me." And even though we can't tear down a physical wall with our bare hands, we should be able to face the challenges life presents. So why do we feel incapable, insecure, stuck? Because we pay attention to the restrictive narrative we tell ourselves, without questioning it. But even more important than the narrative itself is what it hides. There is a very old story, simple but revealing. It is said that a king of India, traveling in his chariot, came across a man sleeping by the side of the road. Moved by compassion, the king asked his charioteer to stop. He got out, approached, and placed a very valuable emerald in the man's pocket. He thought that, upon awakening, the man would rise from abject poverty to the most astonishing wealth. Years passed. By chance, the king walked that same road again. He saw the same man, aged and dressed in rags. The king stopped his carriage again, got out, and puzzled asked, "What are you still doing here, living like this?" The man replied with resignation, "I'm a poor man. I have no other choice." "And the emerald?" the king asked. "What emerald?" The man reached into his pocket, and to his amazement, there it was. It had never occurred to him to look inside himself. This is what happens to many of us. We wrap ourselves in our beggar's clothes and say, "I can't. Life has condemned me." And it doesn't occur to us to look inside, deep within ourselves, where perhaps an unsuspected wealth resides. If I thought this was just a fable, a story to pass the time, I'd keep quiet. But it isn't. I know this because we've all, at some point, had experiences that confirm it. So why not accept that this is real? The novel in question is structured according to what is known as the hero's journey, a pattern deeply studied by the great humanist thinker Joseph Campbell. He discovered that a common structure always appears in Eastern and Western mythologies, that of the hero who, abandoning his known world, ventures into the unknown, overcomes trials, is transformed, and returns with new knowledge. Campbell even influenced major works of contemporary cinema. It is said that George Lucas, creator of a famous galactic saga, invited him to his ranch to show him a film based on his research. Campbell was amazed. This hero's journey is, in essence, the transition from a limited identity, that of the beggar, to the realization of our potential, the inner emerald. The journey forces you out of your comfort zone, takes you out of the image you've fabricated of yourself, and opens the door to a new world, where you discover your true worth. Therefore, in the novel, like the four protagonists, we embark on an external journey that is, in reality, a path to exploring our inner selves. And upon completing this journey, none of us are the same again. Before Campbell, another thinker had already intuited these truths. He was a disciple of Freud, although he eventually distanced himself from him. He was Swiss and refused to reduce human beings solely to their unconscious impulses. He spoke of the symbolic power of myths and how they reveal hidden aspects of the soul. He called those traits we refuse to see in ourselves the shadow. Often others notice them, and even tell us so, but we resist accepting them. Mythology has the advantage that, by identifying with its characters, we can recognize what we struggle to see. We don't feel it as a personal attack, but rather as a symbolic mirror. So, when someone shows us a figure that reflects our arrogance, for example, we don't feel it as a reproach, but as a revelation. And only then can we transform ourselves. In my experience, human beings have only one true opponent, their own ego. The enemy isn't others, but that blind part of us that clings to a limited image. The ego, with its fears, its pride, its rigidity, has generated more pain in history than any armed conflict. And only when we begin to look inside, with sincerity, can we change that story. Ultimately, all wars stem from the ego, that insistent need to be right, to impose oneself on others, to not listen to or consider a different point of view. This blindness of, I'm right, you're wrong, has fueled conflict since time immemorial. Mythological characters serve as a reflection of the subtle disguises of the human ego. In them, multiple facets can be observed: the apparent Zeus and the true Zeus, his companion, with her nuances, the impetuous god of war, and many others that represent hidden parts of each individual. By identifying them, we can decide, if we so wish, to transform those inner dimensions. In the narrative of a novel that intertwines the human and the sacred, there is an essential thread: medicine. Throughout 6 years of academic training in this discipline, which even address topics such as balneotherapy and the therapeutic effects of thermal baths, it is curious that not even half an hour was devoted to the doctor-patient relationship. However, studies from one of the world's most prestigious universities, with more than 4 decades of research in this area, have revealed something revealing. Between 60% and 80% of diseases in the Western world, including cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, bone and tendon problems, and even some types of cancer, have a direct relationship with the emotional world. Therefore, humanism in medicine is not an add-on, but an essential part, and it is woven naturally into history. The wise father of medicine, who lived more than 2,000 years ago and whose voice still resonates, reminded those who practice the art of healing that it is not the doctor who heals the patient, but the body itself. We all know the difference that feeling loved, accompanied, and valued can make. There's a concept that may not be familiar to those not familiar with medicine: homeostasis. Its main proponent was an American physiologist, a professor at Harvard, who dedicated his life to studying the mechanisms that allow the 60 trillion cells that make up the human body to function in harmony. These mechanisms ensure that cellular aging follows its natural course, that blood sugar levels remain stable, and that cells communicate with each other in an orderly manner. In short, homeostasis is the guardian of the body's protection, vitality, and regeneration. As an anecdote, it is said that a cousin, always with a good sense of humor, used to joke with a digestive surgeon, calling him a soft-pipe plumber. Although the joke hurt a little, the truth is that the digestive system holds fascinating secrets. Consider, for example, how surprising the digestive process is. You eat a potato, and at the end of the process, something completely different leaves the body, while the essential element has been absorbed and utilized. But the most astonishing thing is that one of the most important substances for brain tissue regeneration and memory development, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, known as BDNF, is deeply linked to the digestive system. This compound, classified as a neurotrophin and discovered by a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who lived for more than a century, is largely produced in the gut. This means that some memory problems may be caused by digestive imbalances. Similarly, 90% of serotonin, a key hormone for maintaining calm, serenity, and emotional well-being, is also produced in the digestive system. While the spinal cord contains about 100 million neurons, the gut has 500 million, 5 times more. Therefore, when someone lives in a constant state of tension, fear, or worry, the body's alarm system begins to deteriorate in various areas, one of them being the digestive system. As a result, BDNF levels decrease, serotonin levels decrease, and the immune system also weakens. Everything is connected. The human body is a universe that responds not only to the physical, but also, and above all, to the emotional. Understanding this means approaching a more humane, wiser, and deeper medicine. Chapter 2. 80% of the immune function that protects us from bacteria, viruses, and certain cellular disorders is regulated by the digestive system. This internal harmony, known as homeostasis and so beautifully explained by physiologist Walter Bradford Cannon, is disrupted when we live in constant fear, when we lose hope, or feel incapable. Fascinatingly, the most recent discoveries reveal that when a person feels loved, valued, and accepted, the parasympathetic nervous system, specifically the vagal system, is activated, which significantly improves digestive function. Humans are social beings, and when they feel recognized, cared for, and accepted, their entire body perceives it. The 60 trillion cells that comprise them respond positively. It has even been observed that the length of telomeres, small structures at the ends of chromosomes related to longevity, lengthens. For this reason, holistic medicine, which not only includes the scientific and technological advances that inspire so much, but also a vision that respects the body as a whole, becomes essential. In addition to the brain, with its 100 billion neurons and trillions of connections, the heart also has 40,000 neurons. Although it may seem like a small number, the electromagnetic field it generates is about 5,000 times more powerful than that of the brain. This field, known as the cardiac torus, extends up to about 3 meters away, influencing those around us. Others can perceive whether our heart is calm or in conflict. When the brain, heart, and digestive system synchronize, the brain enters a phase of coherence that transforms its functioning. Memory improves, intelligence increases, and comprehension expands. However, we often forget these inherent human resources. We all like to have control, to feel safe, valued, and accepted. We enjoy being greeted warmly in a restaurant or treated kindly anywhere. It's natural, and it's part of what makes us human. The problem arises when this need for control, security, or belonging becomes an obsession. It then becomes a prison. When we don't receive the attention we desire, frustration ensues. When the world changes unexpectedly, we feel deeply distressed. When we are not welcomed as we expect, a loneliness that is difficult to bear arises. In a society that is becoming increasingly volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex, it is no surprise that anxiety levels skyrocket, along with its close companion, persistent sadness. What I seek to convey, both in writing and speaking, is that it's perfectly understandable to crave security, recognition, and affection. However, true growth occurs when we accept uncertainty not as a threat, but as an opportunity. When we stop worrying and start focusing on growing from within. When we decide that contributing to the well-being of others will be a priority in our lives. The magic happens when you wake up in the morning not wondering who will help you, but how many people you'll be able to help that day. That's the central message. After these words, a moment of discussion opened up for those present. One person raised their hand and asked a profound question. Is it normal, when someone is going through a period of profound sadness, to unload their emotions on those they love the most and are closest to? The response was clear and compassionate. When a person feels in danger, and this can have many physical or emotional causes, their body tenses. This internal pressure is very uncomfortable, and human beings instinctively seek to relieve it. There are 3 basic responses: aggression, isolation, and blockage. In the case of aggression, it can manifest itself in words, thoughts, or actions. It can also take more subtle forms, such as guilt, whether directed toward others or toward oneself. Sigmund Freud himself suggested that deep sadness could be understood as an aggression directed against the self. Another response is flight. The person distances themselves, isolates themselves, and withdraws. And the third is blockage, where vital energy seems to stop. Why do these reactions occur specifically with loved ones? First, because with them, it's very difficult to maintain the emotional distance that allows us to see things in perspective. An illustrative anecdote was shared. In a hospital, a brilliant surgeon was having difficulty operating on an appendectomy that wasn't particularly complicated. The reason was that the patient was his son. Emotional involvement prevents one from acting objectively, without implying a lack of kindness or affection. The second reason is that social pressure is less with those close to you. It's easier to speak up at home than to a superior at work. However, the important thing isn't to feel guilty about these reactions. Guilt and shame, emotions very prevalent in our Western culture, don't solve the problem. They actually make it worse. The key is to learn to observe oneself. Little by little, with patience and without judgment, one can develop an attitude of internal contemplation. By adopting an observer position, without condemnation or approval, a path of understanding opens up. This is the basis of a transformative practice, mindfulness, a methodology that doesn't seek to label, but simply to observe with openness and curiosity. Although the subject is vast, this is the essence of what we wanted to share. When you face a problem, one of the wisest decisions you can make is to reach out to those who have already overcome it. These people, having changed their way of thinking and transformed their beliefs, possess valuable perspectives. Talking with them allows you to access new points of view, understand their processes, and learn what they did to overcome what worries you today. Their experience can open up paths you may not have considered. Setting goals, if done with genuine intention, can act as a powerful catalyst for transformation. It's not enough to simply desire superficial change. Seriously committing to a goal involves provoking profound changes in your life. These changes, in turn, awaken limiting thoughts that may have been there for years, hidden, unexamined. These are ideas you've adopted without question, what your parents taught you, what society dictates, what your job expects of you. It's that cultural inertia that often leads us to follow paths we haven't freely chosen. We're encouraged to do whatever it takes to go to college, even going into debt if necessary. Then, we're expected to choose a safe career, one that guarantees an income even if we're not passionate about it. After that, we seek out the best job possible and begin climbing the career ladder, often just to pay off debt or maintain a prescribed lifestyle. Thus, our goals end up being borrowed decisions, shaped by other people's expectations, not by our true desires. We mistakenly believe that happiness will come with more money, material possessions, and status. The mind projects these ideas. When I have this, then I'll be happy. And so we begin to pursue things in the hope that they will give us balance or validation. We seek external approval, struggle with the idea of not being enough, and become obsessed with doing everything perfectly. Without realizing it, we sacrifice our inner peace, suffocating our true balance in pursuit of goals that don't even make sense to us. The price of living like this is high. Constantly giving up peace to achieve something indicates that you're on the wrong path. The goals that are truly worthwhile are those that come from the heart, not those imposed by others or those that seem convenient from the outside. Earning money can be beautiful, but even more beautiful is earning it doing what you love, or better yet, living without depending so much on it to feel fulfilled. It's probably happened to you. You know someone who has everything materially, yet lives in constant dissatisfaction. They judge, complain, justify themselves. And then you see someone who, despite having very little, lives with genuine joy. They don't need more to be happy. So why do we condition our happiness on the future? On having the ideal partner, starting a family, landing their dream job, as if only by achieving these goals are we worthy of feeling at peace. When we live like this, the present becomes a sterile place for happiness. The mind dictates, you can't be happy until you achieve this, and then the path toward that goal becomes filled with frustration. We become unhappy beings in the name of a future ideal. But what's truly important isn't the outcome, but the process. Because it's in that journey that the potential for awakening, for discovering what we truly want, lies. As you get to know yourself better, your goals may transform. You may discover that you no longer want to live where you thought you would, or that your goal isn't to buy a house, but to move to another country. And that's okay. It's along the way that the keys appear that reconnect you with your essence, with your authenticity. That which doesn't respond to cultural patterns or prefabricated molds of success. Of course, there are people for whom this traditional lifestyle works. But there are also many for whom it doesn't, and that's also true. The important thing is to go through the process with awareness. Often, it's a crisis that forces us to wake up and see how much we've paid for not living mindfully. There we understand why we've conditioned our happiness and how we can free ourselves from it. The process of getting from where you are to where you want to be isn't simply a displacement. It's a profound journey toward growth. A true goal isn't something you already do or possess, but something that challenges you, that calls to you from a distance. It's something that shines for you, that inspires you. And if it represents a challenge, then it also represents an opportunity to evolve. For someone who runs marathons all the time, setting a goal of running another marathon isn't a real challenge. But when you set a goal for yourself that you haven't yet achieved, that's where the transformation begins. That process can be sacred, a deeply spiritual experience. Because that's where you come face to face with your limiting thoughts, with those beliefs that have held you back. If those thoughts didn't exist, you would have already reached your goal. It's precisely these mental obstacles that indicate a real opportunity for growth. Some of these thoughts can feel like concrete walls, seemingly impossible to overcome. As Don Miguel Ruiz said, reality is built on agreements. If we agree that something is real, then it is. If we don't agree, then for us it doesn't exist. Two skeptical scientists may deny the existence of quantum physics if they find no convincing evidence, while for others, who have explored it from their own experience, it is an indisputable reality. The same goes for your goals, your beliefs, and your possibilities. It all depends on the internal agreements you've made with yourself and the value you place on them. Changing those agreements is the first step to changing your reality. So, this comment has a fundamental purpose: to help us understand that when a person does something they don't like, it's not helpful to apply a corrective strategy that reinforces the possibility of that behavior being repeated. If one feels guilty or ashamed, the internal pressure increases and they're more likely to act the same way again. On the other hand, if you observe what happened without judgment, with attention and serenity, change tends to occur naturally. That's what I would tell you. Has this reflection been of any use to you? Your expression seems to say only half-heartedly. But at least you've done something important. You've asked, and that, without a doubt, is a big step. The simple fact of sharing one of your problems here is already a very positive and courageous thing to do. Generally, we tend to keep our difficulties to ourselves, not sharing them with others. But expressing what one is experiencing internally is an act of honesty and strength. Now, before you sit down, let me ask something. Who hasn't spoken out inappropriately at some point? Who hasn't felt overwhelmed or overcome by sadness at some point in their life? Welcome to the club. The real problem is that we often don't talk about it. Everyone keeps it to themselves, believing they're the only one going through this. When the world's best psychotherapy schools were evaluated to determine which was the most effective, the conclusion was that it's not a specific methodology that makes the difference, but rather the quality of the relationship between people. Many of our problems arise because we fail to see the other person as someone like us, with dreams, hopes, internal struggles, and worries. If we were able to see that, we would live longer, be healthier, and be more productive. A woman in the back raised her hand and wanted to ask if it was possible to do so anonymously. Of course, her wish was respected. She commented that she had been very intrigued by the idea that digestive system diseases were directly related to memory loss, and she wanted to know if this was supported scientifically and with rigorous data. She also asked what specific digestive tract diseases might be related to this cognitive decline, as she considered it to be a topic of great social importance. That is indeed an excellent question. Everything I mention in the field of medicine is based on research and is not my own invention. The study of the connection between the digestive system and the brain is a relatively new field, but one with interesting findings. Let's think, for example, about a highly stressful situation. Imagine that instead of being in this room, we were in the middle of nature, somewhere remote. and suddenly we bumped into a tiger. Would it make sense for our digestive system to function as if nothing were happening at that moment? Of course not. In situations of extreme anxiety, the brain prioritizes other functions and almost completely reduces digestive activity. This can have consequences. A clear example is what is known as leaky gut. There are diseases such as ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, in which it has been proven that professional intervention to help reduce stress levels has a positive effect on the development of the disease. These are serious conditions with intense symptoms. Irritable bowel syndrome, which affects a large portion of the population, is also associated with an imbalance that the body perceives, even if the person, rationally, feels stable. Memory, for its part, is also influenced by these factors. There are even studies that suggest that some disorders, such as autism, could be partly related to altered digestive processes. It's not about saying that one thing directly causes the other, but rather recognizing that there is a significant interaction. We know, for example, that for new neural connections to form, a factor called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is necessary, and one of the main sources of this factor's production is found in the digestive system. It is also known that, to combat certain inflammations, the body needs specific nutrients that can only be absorbed if the digestive system is functioning properly. In depression, for example, brain inflammation has been proven, which is why the consumption of fatty acids such as omega-3s is recommended. Leaky gut syndrome, associated with prolonged states of stress, can trigger an immune response in which the body begins to attack itself due to the entry of toxic elements through the digestive system. All of this contributes to what's called generalized inflammation. And yes, there is data to support this connection, although we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking it's the only factor responsible. It's just one factor within a complex system. Then, from the left, a woman asked to speak. She didn't want to ask a question, but rather to thank everyone. She explained that she had been working in the educational field for years, specializing in neurofunctionality and collaborating with a team that includes a doctor in biochemistry who is an expert in nutritional physiology and immunonutrition. They have worked with children with ADHD and some with autism, addressing intestinal dysbiosis and problems in the metabolism of certain proteins. Not all cases are the same. As you rightly said, there is no single formula. But they have seen notable improvements in these children, especially in their immune system and neurotransmitter levels. Problems in the metabolism of certain proteins affect the production of serotonin, among other important substances. And although he didn't go into technical details, he wanted to express his deep gratitude because it was the first time he'd heard someone in the medical field explain everything so clearly. It was a sincere show of appreciation. The response was equally sincere. What you do is admirable. Unfortunately, in the field of education, big words are often spoken, but not always given the real importance it deserves. What Carmen mentioned is essential. Today, those who wish to broaden their perspective are realizing that everything is connected. The idea that the digestive system is on one side and the brain on the other no longer makes sense. To illustrate this, studies have been done on bodies donated for science that have revealed astonishing connections, and this is just the beginning of what we can discover. Using advanced computing techniques, it has been shown that if we were to gather all the nerves in the human body, thick, thin, long, and short, and place them one after the other, they would reach a length of approximately 40,000 kilometers. It's astonishing to think that, with such an internal expanse, we still find it hard to believe that everything in our bodies is connected. We could, in theory, encircle the entire Earth with our own nerves. Isn't that a poetic way of traveling? Yet we live so focused on what happens outside of us, so obsessed with the external, that we barely appreciate what we have inside. Thanks for the comment, Carmen. My name is Alfonso, and I want to congratulate you, Mario. We loved your contribution. I'd like to share a concern. I firmly believe in the importance of leaving your comfort zone. I like challenges. In fact, I usually set many for myself and I enjoy them immensely. However, I have a question. When you find yourself outside of that comfort zone, facing a challenge, you experience a kind of stress that, although intense, can also be rewarding. When you overcome these challenges, we feel a flood of positive emotions, and I'm convinced that the body releases substances like serotonin and endorphins that make us feel good. But therein lies the contradiction. Being outside your comfort zone can sometimes feel like being out of control. How does that affect the body? What kind of stress are we actually experiencing? It's an excellent question. And fortunately, thanks to the work of Professor Hans Selye, we can better understand this phenomenon. Selye, a Hungarian-born doctor trained in Prague, was a key figure in our understanding of stress. What you're suggesting, Alfonso, is very apparent. When we leave our comfort zone, we immediately face a volatile, uncertain, and complex environment, what we now call the VUCA world. And this automatically activates stress mechanisms. Thanks to Hans Selye's research, we now know that there are two forms of stress, eustress and distress. When distress is triggered, for example, cortisol levels rise significantly. This hormone, in excess, can even damage neurons. Conversely, when eustress is triggered, adrenaline predominates, stimulating us without causing neuronal damage. Both are stress mechanisms, but one drives us forward and the other wears us down. The key to staying in eustress and avoiding distress lies in the faith we have in ourselves and our abilities. In 1906, a unique figure in history received the Nobel Prize. Born in 1855 and died in 1934, he is cited approximately 500 times a year in neuroscience publications. He was a pioneer who intuited that, even in a changing and challenging world, if one continued to believe in one's abilities, the brain could be transformed. He expressed it with a memorable phrase: "Every human being, if they set their mind to it, can be the sculptor of their own brain." This is where the mind acts on matter, where thought transforms the body. Stepping out of one's comfort zone with an exploratory mindset, thinking, "Let's see what happens if I try it," can generate distress. But if you step out with conviction, "When this happens, my life will change," then, even if you fall and get up several times, your brain truly begins to transform. This was one of that wise man's great contributions. The problem is that many people leave their comfort zone without a vision to inspire them, without faith in themselves, without feeling supported by someone who tells them, "You can do it." So, it's not that they don't achieve their goals because they can't, but because they believe they can't. The difference is vital. Distress drags us down, while eustress stretches us and propels us forward. Good afternoon, Mario. With your permission, I'd like to share something with those listening. I was fortunate enough to meet you at a special time. You were working on the book. I remember a party in a lovely garden, and your enthusiasm was contagious. A lovely garden, and your enthusiasm was contagious. The excitement with which you spoke about your project made it clear that the book would come to fruition. I'm not surprised you've achieved this, and I sincerely congratulate you on it. My question is related to what you mentioned about how you wrote the book. You mentioned that there was a 6-month period where nothing was flowing, and then suddenly, in a few hours, you sat down at the computer and wrote the first 2 chapters. Shortly after, in just 2 months, you completed the entire book. How do you explain that process? I had the feeling that, in some way, you connected with a universal mind, as if the book had been dictated or channeled to you. But I'd like to know your personal opinion on it. The creative process, which we all carry within us, is something profoundly human. Listen carefully. It's impossible to be a person and not be creative. If you're not experiencing creativity in your lives, it's not because you don't have it, but because you're not accessing it. And often, what prevents this is our own education system. Several years ago, the director of the Sebra Institute in Milan said a provocative phrase: "You're born a genius, you're already clumsy." When someone asked him what was happening in the middle, he replied, "The educational system. That system we're all part of, which often punishes play, exploration, and curiosity." Phrases like "curiosity killed the cat," "better the devil you know than the devil you don't," or "Mother, may I stay as I am," are reflections of a culture that inhibits initiative. How can anyone want to venture beyond their comfort zone if they've been taught since childhood that doing so can be dangerous? It's hard for creativity to flourish that way. Let's take an example. Death Valley, California, is one of the most inhospitable places in the world. It's recommended not to leave your car because the extreme heat can cause dehydration in minutes. However, one year, surprisingly, the valley was covered in flowers. How is that possible? Because it had rained the previous spring. The seeds were always there, dormant, waiting for the right conditions. This is what happens with creativity. It is in all of us, like those seeds, waiting for the right moment, the right environment, enough faith to flourish. Chapter 3. The creative process consists of 4 phases. The first is the preparation phase, which in my case consisted of thoroughly researching subjects like mythology, classical philosophy, and other fields, mulling over ideas. This is left-brain work, a meticulous and unglamorous endeavor, but absolutely necessary. However, if you add passion, interest, and confidence to this preparation, the left hemisphere begins to transmit information to the right hemisphere, which acts as a gateway to the unconscious. There, beyond our conscious awareness, something magical happens. The right hemisphere doesn't operate like the left. While the left hemisphere analyzes and breaks down, for example, examining a bottle to describe its color, weight, or label, the right hemisphere connects seemingly disparate dots. It's as if it were taking that same bottle and relating it to objects or ideas that, at first, wouldn't have any connection: a microphone, a sign, a pen. This is the famous connecting the dots Steve Jobs mentioned. Thus, the right hemisphere incubates ideas in the shadows, without us realizing it, until, suddenly, the revelation emerges. The revelation phase comes unexpectedly, like a flash. In my case, it was as if someone were dictating the entire narrative of a novel to me, already structured and ready to be written. This feeling that creation comes from something beyond immediate consciousness can be disconcerting. In fact, as I wrote the first chapters, I was plagued by doubt. Does this have value? That's why I decided to send them for evaluation. It's common for the left hemisphere, accustomed to rigid patterns, to reject these unusual ideas, but when it's allowed to flow, something profound emerges. I'm not talking about mediumship or supernatural forces, but rather about a spiritual or transcendental dimension inherent to human beings. We are not just biology. There is something more intimate than ourselves, a connection with the profound that manifests itself in creativity. Studies with functional magnetic resonance imaging have detected, in the aha or eureka moment, a train of gamma waves originating in the superior temporal gyrus of the right hemisphere. This is science confirming what artists intuit. Regarding the dreaded blank page, I think it's a real challenge. In my experience, facing that void lasted 6 months, until, suddenly, the entire novel burst forth. Some deal better with the initial void. Others need to start from something concrete. But the blank page is merely the prelude to what's to come. Regarding narrative technique, I never considered whether to write in the first or third person. It just flowed. After finishing the first draft, I studied literary theory and discovered, to my amazement, that many instinctive decisions coincided with what the manuals considered correct. This reinforces an idea. The how often emerges naturally when the why is strong enough. Life doesn't require us to know everything before we begin, only that we have a clear purpose. Finally, regarding the comfort zone, there is no contradiction. It's a necessary refuge, a space of security and affection, but staying there forever limits growth. Balance lies in knowing when to embrace its warmth and when to leap into the unknown. Life is that dance between taking root and taking flight. It's important to acknowledge that space, but it's also important to regain responsibility. For example, with my friends, when they come to me with issues, I tell them, "Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not going to validate that everything that's happening to you is someone else's fault. I'm going to ask you, how are you contributing to what's happening to you? In what ways are you co-creating this situation? It doesn't mean that what's happening to you is bad or that you're wrong. We all have aspects of our personalities that need to be improved, and that doesn't mean we're not valuable or don't have infinite potential. What I mean is that when we're in a moment of suffering, there are usually deeply held thoughts we're unwilling to let go of. The conversation, in that case, can be very kind and conscious. Sometimes I ask my friends, I understand that what you're telling me is causing you a lot of pain. I can see that it's affecting you deeply, but are you completely sure of what you're saying? Do you have clear evidence of what you feel? Buddhist practice teaches us that one of the fundamental steps is to be accompanied by a community, the Sangha. But community isn't just a group of people. Speaking of community in this context means surrounding yourself with those who support you in your growth, who validate your responsibility and help you understand that the decisions you make have an impact. If you don't surround yourself with people who are on the same journey, then they won't understand you. A few weeks ago, for example, I was having lunch with a friend who was telling me about problems she was having with her boyfriend, and one of our friends started judging him. Upon hearing this, I knew the conversation wasn't going in the right direction. It wasn't constructive or conscious. The person sharing her experience is also a personal development teacher, and I knew I wouldn't tolerate that attitude. So, very clearly, she told our friend, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, but I don't want you to judge my boyfriend because, honestly, you don't know him. I'm going to sit down with him later, and if you keep making those comments, I'm not going to feel comfortable. He did it in such a responsible way that it stopped the conversation in its tracks. That's what we need, to surround ourselves with people who, instead of following the impulse of easy criticism, help us think more deeply and constructively. It's very easy to fall into the temptation of saying, your boyfriend is awful. Everything is so bad, because that's what the ego likes to hear, easy judgment. But that's not how we grow. True personal development comes from questioning our beliefs, our emotions, and our thoughts, and being willing to step outside our comfort zone. The community you mention is key, as it helps us understand the causes and consequences of our actions. If we keep this principle in mind, we move forward with greater awareness, and in that progress we find liberation. Life isn't just about being happy all the time. Life is about moving forward, and in that progress lies true liberation. When you free yourself from the prisons of the mind, you achieve true peace. To achieve that progress, it's necessary to face some discomfort. Personal development requires just that, discomfort, stepping outside of what we know, questioning it. As you mentioned, it may be uncomfortable at first, and at that moment, one might be tempted to reject that discomfort. But instead of running away, one must say, okay, even if it makes me uncomfortable, I'm not going to reject it. The problem lies in the fact that we have a limiting belief that tells us we must reject everything uncomfortable. Every time we feel an emotion that makes us uncomfortable, our impulse is to repress it, ignore it, run away from it. However, what we really need is to learn how to manage it and grow through it. So, it might seem that one of life's natural paths is to move from one comfort zone to another, each one better than the last. To achieve this, it's necessary to leave that familiar zone. I'm interested in knowing how this process can be carried out. Is it through small steps or through larger changes? Is the stress it generates mild or significant? Should it be continuous progress? If at any point I've fallen into a contradiction or made a mistake in explaining this, let me clarify. The comfort zone is neither good nor bad. It simply is. It gives what it can give, like a plate of food. If you have a plate in front of you with rice, shrimp, and artichokes, that's what it offers. Don't expect it to also give you something completely different. The comfort zone gives what it gives, no more, no less. And what it offers, above all, is a sense of familiarity. I don't call it comfort because many people can be deeply uncomfortable within their comfort zone. Yet they stay there because it feels familiar. That old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't, makes perfect sense here. The comfort zone is built because it makes us feel safe. It gives us an illusion of control. But it only takes one significant experience, a reading, a comment, a life-changing encounter, to activate certain inner chords we all have in our hearts. And then the question arises, what if I'm missing something much bigger? Another way out is meditation, a surprising practice that can take you out of your comfort zone, although it requires constant effort. Now, if a person lacks a true desire to grow, to discover, or if they don't find themselves in a situation painful enough to be truly fed up with themselves, then the comfort zone can exert an almost gravitational pull on them. In those cases, they most likely won't leave, unless life pushes them. And life, when it pushes, isn't always kind. It can do so through illness, a layoff, a loss, or any other unexpected circumstance. Today, we could say that this comfort zone is constantly threatened, crumbling. When someone is pushed out of their comfort zone, they may react in different ways, shrinking emotionally, feeling irritable, blocked, wanting to escape, or they may, instead, trust that it's an opportunity to grow. The key lies in how we interpret what happens to us. That's how the mind works. In my experience, no one leaves their comfort zone from a neutral state. It's impossible, because the walls that surround it are made of a very special material, fear. And to break through them, you need a powerful emotional lever that overcomes that fear. If you're not truly fed up with being fed up, or if you don't have a vision that's inspiring enough to pull you forward, it's very difficult to move forward. And as for how to do it, suddenly or gradually, I think the ideal is to continually train yourself to see uncertainty as a space where comfort can also exist, stretching it little by little. Although there are times in life when you don't have that luxury, you simply have to take the leap. Either you do it, or you're left behind. We could spend the whole afternoon talking about this, but let's move on. I was asked if, when we talk about reinventing ourselves, we're not actually talking about rediscovering ourselves. And that's an excellent observation, because words often fail to explain certain experiences. It's like trying to describe the taste of a peach to someone who's never tasted one. You can write an entire treatise, and that person will understand it intellectually, but they won't be able to experience it. When I wrote about reinvention, I thought about those people who felt trapped in a way of being, of existing in the world, and didn't know how to escape. Reinvention is a way of recreating oneself, deeply grounded in what we know today about effective neuroscience. In other words, it's about creating new mental connections, new internal resources, a new version of oneself. But, as you said, the path begins with self-recognition. By getting to know yourself again, you discover dimensions of yourself you didn't know existed. And that recognition extends to the deepest level. Your entire being aligns with that new vision. And then, transformation happens. That book was an exercise in greater personal maturity for me. I appreciate the words, and there's just one last big question. How do you overcome your ego? First, I want to explain how I understand the ego. Then, I'll explain what I consider useless to do with it. And finally, how I think it can be transcended. For me, the ego is a deeply rooted belief in human beings, but one that is fundamentally flawed. And that belief is separation. The idea that I am separate from you, from others, from the world. When I feel separate, I feel vulnerable, threatened. So I begin to interpret reality based on that constant threat. Albert Einstein, with his unparalleled wisdom, posed a fundamental question. Do I live in a hostile or friendly universe? That question completely changes one's perspective on life. A person who believes in separation will live in fear. A person who feels a part of life, deeply loved by it, will tend to see the universe as a friendly place. And when faced with difficulties, instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" they will ask, "What can I learn from this?" From my perspective, only love can transcend the ego. Love for others, which manifests itself through sincere generosity. When you do something for another person because you care, because you believe in them, even if you don't know them, the ego can't control that. It doesn't understand it. And that transforms everything. What doesn't work is fighting the ego. It's useless to fight it as if it were an enemy. Albert Einstein said something very profound. Cold doesn't exist. It's simply the absence of heat. Darkness doesn't exist. It's the absence of light. Therefore, if you want to illuminate a room, don't fight the darkness. Just turn on the light. That's how it is with the ego. It's not eliminated by fighting it. It vanishes when love is introduced. According to Greek tradition, there are 3 forms of love. Eros, which is romantic love. Philia, love for friends and children. And agape, which is love as a choice, not as an emotion. The latter is the most liberating. You choose to treat someone with love, even if you don't feel it at the moment, simply because you have chosen to live that way. For me, that is the greatest act of freedom. The ego dissolves when we give generously, not because we expect something in return, but because the other person truly matters to us. In that moment, we access another dimension and experience something deeper than momentary well-being. We experience true happiness. As a wise philosopher once said, well-being is that which satisfies the senses, but happiness is that which fills the heart. And I firmly believe this.